Now, family, my mother works in an office and I know very well what it's like when you work as the violet. This isn't just a story for the sake of use, it's based on real emotions and experiences. The goal is for you to recognize yourself and not repeat other people's mistakes. All names, companies, and details in the video are fictional and have been changed.
He placed it on my desk like it was a prize. I hadn't even taken my coat off. Just walked into the office, December wind still clinging to my scarf, and there it was. This pitiful bottle of whiskey with a half-peeled label and a plastic cap that didn't even click shut. No envelope, no note. Just a silence so loud it might as well have been laughter. 11 years. That's how long I'd been holding Cresswell Holdings together from behind the curtain. I was the one who made sure procurement didn't implode, who double-checked contract language before it burned us, who tracked every audit, every vendor, every missed clause that could have sunk the place. And for all that, Nolan Brett, my boss, handed me clearance bin liquor like I was a door prize at a used car dealership. I stared at it for a beat too long. Warehouse guys walked past and chuckled. One even whistled. Wow, must have set him back a whole $8.99, someone muttered behind me. I smiled, tight-lipped. You learn not to react. Not here. Nolan was the type who weaponized charm and called it leadership. I'd seen him throw people under the bus with a grin on his face and a latte in his hand. That bottle didn't offend me because of its price. It offended me because of its meaning. I've always believed gifts say more about the giver than the recipient. And this one screamed loud and clear, "You're invisible." Hey, real quick before we go on, 97% of you listen to stories like this without subscribing. If you're one of them, hit that subscribe button and like the video. It genuinely helps us keep these stories going. Thanks for supporting the team. Anyway, I didn't throw the bottle away. I didn't drink it either. I just slipped it into my briefcase next to my badge and a folder labeled contingencies. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't just thoughtlessness. It was deliberate. I'd seen Nolan's type before. Men who act like your career is a favor they're doing you, like loyalty is something you owe but never deserve in return. The tag on the bottle said bulk order, promo clearance, which meant this wasn't a one-off. He'd ordered a crate of these, probably handed the same thing to everyone from the temp at reception to the COO. That's the problem with guys like Nolan. They think equal means empty. I didn't confront him. I didn't roll my eyes or make a show. I just quietly decided. If that bottle was going to be part of a gesture, it wouldn't be his. That night, I dusted off my 11-year portfolio, the one nobody had ever asked to see. I updated it. Cross-referenced operational redundancies I'd resolved, compliance gaps I'd patched, contracts I'd personally renegotiated to save the company money. It wasn't a resume, it was a receipts folder. And the next morning, I carried that bottle, cheap plastic top and all, into the building, placed it in a discreet gift bag, and walked into the elevator like I was heading to war dressed for brunch. Because sometimes the dumbest, pettiest insult is the best match for a slow, clean burn. The room smelled like burnt espresso and overcompensation. Nolan waltzed in 10 minutes late to the leadership huddle like it was some improv show, sleeves rolled halfway up like he was about to rebuild a server rack instead of gut the morale of another department. Tie loose, mug in hand, hair tousled just enough to look busy. It was all theater with him. Always had been. Performative chaos wrapped in cologne and thin sarcasm. He did his usual scan of the room like a lazy lion checking for wounded gazelle. His eyes landed on me, standing near the window, flipping through my notes for the upcoming vendor reconciliation. I could see it coming before he opened his mouth. The smirk was already forming, part smug, part bait, fully rehearsed. "So, did you like your gift?" he said, projecting like we were on stage and the interns in the back row needed to hear it too. I didn't even blink, just looked at him, slow and still. "I handed it to the CEO," I said. "Thought he should see how leadership values long-term loyalty." The air changed. His smile snapped mid-curve like someone had yanked a fishing line. You could feel the tension ripple through the room, subtle but sharp. One of the VPs coughed into their sleeve. Someone else suddenly became very interested in their notepad. You what?" he stuttered, trying to chuckle it off like I'd misunderstood a joke. But I hadn't. The pause between us stretched too long. He started tapping his mug against his leg, a nervous habit, usually masked as rhythm. Not this time. He tried to save it, some rambling nonsense about light-hearted appreciation, about how the whiskey wasn't meant to be symbolic. Just a holiday thing, casual. But nobody was listening. Because what they heard, what they all heard, was how calmly I said it, how intentional it was. And worse, how unbothered I seemed. That's the part men like Nolan can't stand, when you're not playing their game, when you flip the script and don't even need a mic drop. He couldn't know that the CEO had just come back from a closed-door meeting with the board, a meeting Nolan wasn't invited to because for the first time in a long time, the top floor had started asking questions about procurement bottlenecks and budget leaks. And Nolan? Well, his answers never came with spreadsheets, just charisma and coffee breath. I didn't need to announce what I'd done. I hadn't stormed into the CEO's office with a grievance and a whiskey bottle. I'd requested a quiet 5 minutes. I handed over the bottle in the same bag Nolan had given it to me in. Set it next to my portfolio, open to the page titled Unrecognized Contributions 2012-2023. That's all. The CEO didn't say much, but he didn't have to. His eyes lingered on the words and then on the bottle. He nodded once. Slow, measured. Back in the huddle, Nolan was still fumbling to recover. He made some flailing comment about how everyone gets the same gift. And it's not about value, it's about consistency. But I could feel it already, how the room's temperature shifted, how eyes started looking not at him, but at me. Because when the quiet one speaks with precision, it echoes louder than all the boardroom bluster in the world. Nolan's damage control started the way all weak apologies do. Too late, too loud, and far too convenient. Around 2:15, HR pinged me with a quick chat request. I walked in to find Nolan already there, arms crossed, looking like a kid caught stuffing test answers in his shoe. He cleared his throat, didn't look me in the eye. Apparently, some of my holiday gestures were misinterpreted. I didn't respond. Let silence do the talking. HR chimed in with the usual PR-soaked babble. We just want to make sure everyone feels appreciated and that no team member thinks they're being singled out or overlooked. I raised one eyebrow at the word appreciated. Then I stood, thanked them both, and walked out. 12 minutes later, a new calendar invite popped up on my screen. Meeting. Office of CEO time, 3 p.m. attendees, CEO, VP Ops, VP Finance, MDAWS. No subject line, no context, just that name at the top. When I arrived, the air felt different, clean, still. The kind of stillness that happens when you've been caught staring at something for too long. On the conference table was a printed version of my 11-year performance record. Not the internal HR fluff Nolan skimmed once a year, but my real documentation. Notes, projects, vendor strategies, efficiency reports, my private audit trail, and sitting beside it like a forgotten punchline, the bottle. The CEO gestured to the chair across from him. Matthew, he said. Walk me through what you manage, all of it. No hi, no thanks for coming, just those 5 words. Measured, sharp, surgical. I didn't flinch. I just reached into my leather portfolio and pulled out the binder I'd updated the night before. Black cover, no label. It slid across the table like a sealed indictment. They opened it to the first tab. Procurement structure. I watched their eyes move from the vendor tiering diagram to the cost leverage strategy I implemented during the 2017 downturn. Then onto the audit avoidance loop I'd built to preempt compliance backlogs. Next tab, redundancy patches, 2015 to present. A full log of moments where I'd caught gaps, rewrote protocols, and sent Nolan credit-ready summaries he never once forwarded. The CEO flipped the pages silently. Every so often, he'd pause on a chart or a flagged memo, then glance back at the printed review file. Seeing, I imagined the gaping canyon between what was reported and what had actually happened. The VPs? They were quieter than I'd ever seen them. One of them, the VP of Ops, leaned forward halfway through and murmured, "Wait, you drafted the fallback logistics plan last year?" I nodded. He looked stunned. I thought that was Nolan. I didn't even bother correcting him. The binder had already done that. The CEO finally closed the folder. His hand rested briefly on the whiskey bottle. Not in some symbolic way, just long enough to acknowledge what it had become. Then he pushed it to the far corner of the table like it was garbage, cluttering his workspace. "Thank you, Matthew," he said. "That'll be all for now." I stood, nodded once, and left without a word. But walking down that hallway, I knew something had cracked open. Not loud, not dramatic, just clean, like the first hiss of pressure being released from a system that has been building too long. And Nolan? He had no clue what just slipped out from under him. By Thursday, the air around Crestwell had changed, subtle at first, like the scent of ozone before a storm. Meetings shifted, side chats multiplied. Doors that used to stay open during huddles now shut before the first slide loaded. Nobody said it out loud, but everyone felt it. The system was being quietly picked apart, and the hands doing the picking wore cufflinks from the executive floor. It started with a simple whiteboard. VP Ops rolled it into one of the glass conference rooms and started drawing a flowchart, an org-level map of who touched what. Vendor onboarding, invoice reconciliation, contract refresh cycles, audit pipelines. Line by line, they laid out functions. And one name started repeating like a heartbeat, M-DAWS. They weren't doing it for show. They were doing it to verify what the CEO had already started to suspect, that Nolan's team was a facade. And underneath it, me. 11 years of patching holes, optimizing workflows, preempting failures before they made it past QA. No badge, no glory, just clean numbers that kept things running. That morning, someone from finance popped into my office unannounced. No knock, just a face I barely knew and a folder clutched tight enough to leave creases. "I need to confirm something," she said, slightly breathless. "Did you write this clause in the 2019 renewal with Tabor Freight?" I nodded. "Why?" She opened the folder and pointed to the subclause I remembered drafting late one Friday after catching a discrepancy Nolan ignored, a penalty clause that triggered if delivery delays exceeded 48 hours. This alone saved us $670,000 last year. Then she pulled out a spreadsheet, a total estimate of cost avoidance and operational savings tied directly to my embedded language, reroutes, pre-approvals, and hard-won negotiations that never saw daylight. $4.2 million over 7 years. And that was just what they'd verified so far. She stared at me like she wasn't sure whether to thank me or apologize. "Why wasn't any of this in the team reports?" she asked quietly. "Because no one ever asked," I said, "and I don't report to PowerPoint decks." By the time I walked past the break room later that day, I caught part of a conversation between a junior VP and someone from internal strategy. "Why isn't this stuff under Nolan's team?" Pause, then a whisper. "Because Nolan never touched it." It landed with more weight than they realized. The kind of whisper that travels faster than shouts. The kind that peels back paint and shows rot beneath the surface. My inbox started filling with quick questions. People looking for clarity, for source files, for explanations of processes they'd apparently been executing without understanding. And one by one, the threads kept pointing back to me. My logs, my checklists, my protocols, all signed, all time-stamped, all ignored until now. I didn't brag, didn't strut, just did what I'd always done, kept the engine running. But now, for the first time, they were lifting the hood. And Nolan? He was nowhere in sight. By Friday morning, the hallways had the hush of a church after a scandal. People moved quieter. Conversations died when doors opened. And Nolan, who used to stroll through the floor like he owned the damn carpet, was suddenly scarce, like a politician dodging microphones. But I knew he wouldn't go down without a last attempt to charm his way back into control. That's what made him dangerous. Not his intelligence. He was always average, at best. But his confidence. That blind, bulletproof belief that he could smirk through any fire and convince you it was just warm lighting. At 9:07 a.m., I saw him from my office window, walking into the CEO's suite. Gray blazer, fresh shave. Phone in hand like it was part of his costume. I imagined the opening line before he even spoke it. "Hey, just wanted to clear up a little misunderstanding." Except this time, the stage was different. Later, I heard what happened. Not from office gossip, but from someone who was in the room. Someone who didn't flinch when truth replaced pleasantries. Nolan had barely made it past. "It was just a little holiday gesture, same thing I give everybody, harmless tradition," when the CEO cut in. "We checked the vendor logs," he said flatly. "That bottle came from a bulk clearance run, promo-grade whiskey used for mass mail-outs, bought at $6.94 a bottle. That's your idea of recognition?" Nolan blinked, stammered something about budget constraints, about it being symbolic, about keeping things light during difficult financial quarters. He tried to steer the conversation back toward team morale and retention strategies, buzzwords he pulled out like duct tape over a cracked dam. The CEO let him finish. Then he reached for the stack of papers on the table, a spreadsheet. Clean, simple, color-coded. Reviewed by M. Dawes appeared in every key vendor file. Redundancy plans, audit remediation notes, strategic supply cutbacks. 11 years of back-end muscle, none of it with Nolan's name on it. And then came the question. How much of your team's success is actually his? That was it. No yelling, no accusations, just one question. Hung in the air like a sentence waiting for the punctuation. Silence, the kind that confirms everything you feared was true. The CEO didn't blink, just slid the spreadsheet across the table and sat back. They say Nolan tried to recover, said something about how Matt handles a lot of the grunt work, sure, and that he's great with the details, like I was some overachieving intern lucky to have a seat at the table. But he knew it wasn't working. Not this time. Because every name in that spreadsheet told a different story. Every clause I'd written, every loop I'd closed, every dollar saved had receipts, and they were all pointing in one direction, and it wasn't his. By noon, whispers turned to stares. People weren't pretending anymore. They'd seen the memo slip from legal's office, caught the tension in HR's faces. Someone in admin even said Nolan's assistant had been pulled into a closed-door meeting, alone. And me? I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I just opened a new file on my computer and titled it Integration Transition Plan, Draft 1. Because when the boss has to ask who really does the work, he already knows the answer. He's just looking for the paperwork to cover what happens next. By Monday morning, the cleanup had begun. Legal sent a quiet notice for all department heads to submit updated org flowcharts. HR began scheduling alignment interviews. Nobody used the word fallout, but that's exactly what it was. Only instead of smoke and sirens, it came in the form of Outlook invites and policy templates. I was called into a room I'd only ever walked past before. No fanfare. Just the CEO, the head of HR, and 2 directors from legal. A laptop was open, angled toward me, with an editable draft of the department's org chart. My name was already in the center. We'd like you to review this structure, the CEO said calmly, and adjust it as you see fit. No performance review, no title discussion, just the assumption of control, like the building had already recalibrated itself and was now waiting for me to formalize it. They didn't ask for a vision statement. They wanted architecture, clear lanes, oversight chains. They needed someone who actually understood the foundation to rebuild it without the cracks Nolan had painted over for a decade. So I stayed in that room for 3 hours. I rewrote the department layout from memory, removed the phantom roles Nolan used to buffer himself, streamlined reporting lines that had been routed through his inbox like ceremonial dead ends. I elevated the analysts who actually did the legwork, reallocated budget blind spots, and cut the procedural padding he'd used to make it look like he was working. That afternoon, a memo was sent to all senior staff. Effective immediately, Matthew Dawes will oversee operations strategy integration. All compliance and procurement functions will report directly under his purview. Nolan, placed on executive reassignment leave. No return date, no title, just a politely vague exile wrapped in corporate euphemisms. His assistant was moved the same hour, folded into another team under a different director. No explanation, no goodbye lunch. Someone asked if Nolan had been fired. The official answer was no, but his keycard access was revoked by noon, and his name quietly disappeared from the leadership portal the next day. I didn't request an office move. I didn't need one. But that Friday, I found my things boxed and stacked neatly in front of the double glass doors of what used to be Nolan's office. Inside, the nameplate had been removed. A post-it on the desk read, "It set up complete, welcome." I stood there for a moment. Same view, same creaky chair, same mahogany shelves Nolan used to decorate with whiskey bottles and faux accolades. Only now they were empty, clean, quiet. I didn't bring in trophies, just 3 things. My portfolio binder, a small plant from my old desk, and a framed quote my father gave me when I first started at Crestwell. Don't chase titles, just build something no one else understands well enough to steal. The irony wasn't lost on me. Sitting in the seat he spent years protecting from people like me. But I didn't feel triumphant. I felt precise, anchored. Because real authority doesn't come from being appointed. It comes from being impossible to replace. Exactly 1 week later, I came back from a vendor call to find a box on my chair. No label, no delivery slip, just weight, silence, and timing. The packaging looked familiar, matte black cardboard, the kind that tries too hard to be modest. But this time, the tape was crisp. No tears, no corners peeling from humidity. I opened it slowly, already knowing what was inside. Same brand of whiskey, but not the same bottle. This one was aged 18 years. The label embossed, not printed. The cap sealed tight with a gold ribbon and wax stamp. A velvet drawstring pouch cradled the neck like it mattered. It was the kind of gift you gave when you'd had a week to rethink everything. A bottle that said, "We noticed. Too late, maybe, but we noticed." On top sat a card. Real cardstock. Not the thin pressboard Nolan used for birthdays with pre-typed signatures. Handwritten in heavy black ink, it read, "My apologies. I didn't see it before. I do now." CEO, I read it twice. Then again. The words weren't overthought, weren't drenched in PR polish, just simple, direct. That part of it hit harder than I expected. Tucked in the corner was a small postscript, barely an inch long. Next board meeting, bring that portfolio again. That said more than the apology ever could. I didn't reply. Didn't send a thank you note, just placed the bottle on the shelf behind my desk. Unopened. Not because I was bitter, but because some acknowledgments are meant to sit in full view, untouched. Proof you were seen. That silence wasn't weakness. That every late night, every document triple-checked, every meeting you weren't invited to had weight, and now someone finally felt it. Nolan didn't reach out. Not a text, not an email, no hallway apology or passive-aggressive jab. I think deep down he knew the distance between us had stretched too far to fake a bridge now. The office had moved on. Even the walls didn't remember him anymore. His chair had been removed from the big conference room without ceremony. His name hadn't appeared on a single routing email since Tuesday. Funny, isn't it? All that theater, all that bluffing, and in the end, it came down to one binder and a clearance bottle of booze. I sat there for a long time that evening, lights dimmed, the soft hum of the building's HVAC system filling the space. I stared at the bottle, at the handwritten card, at the quiet acknowledgement that what was invisible had finally become undeniable. Not celebrated, not spotlighted, but respected. That was enough. The reorg wasn't dramatic, it was surgical. Titles shifted, reporting lines restructured, team dashboards updated overnight with new approvals, new workflows, new language. One morning you were forwarding vendor packets through 3 chains of approval. The next, they came directly to me, stamped "Final Review." Not a single announcement. Just changes. Quiet, firm, permanent. My new title didn't scream. It didn't need to. It came with teeth. Authority over contract thresholds, budgetary gates, procurement escalation, and something far more useful than status, veto power. If a vendor had shady subclauses, gone. If a department tried to backdoor a pet contractor, I saw it coming 4 weeks earlier in the pipeline, thanks to the new tracker I built with 2 analysts I hired myself, both former compliance interns who'd been overlooked in Nolan's old org for not having enough edge. What they had was clarity and memory. Together we built a compliance interface from scratch, layered permissions, real-time logging, watermarked audit trails that showed who approved what, when, and why. No more plausible deniability. No more, it must have slipped through. Nolan's go-to excuse had finally been buried under timestamps and signatures. His old process logs? Archived. Not deleted, just filed into a cold corner of the shared drive labeled Legacy, Inactive. That folder hadn't been touched since. Finance asked for a quarterly breakdown report. I handed them a dashboard instead. Color-coded, dynamic, export-ready. They were silent for a moment before one of them whispered, "Did we always have access to this?" No, you didn't. At the annual Crestwell Gala, they rolled out the gold linens and pretended the last 6 months hadn't happened. No one mentioned Nolan's absence. His name never once left a podium or speech. It was like he'd never existed, just a ghost in last year's footnotes. I didn't sit with the executive table. I stayed on the upper balcony, near the quiet bar, sipping something I couldn't pronounce but had the decency to burn like truth. Midway through the evening, the CEO raised a glass and gave a short toast. No names, no titles, just words. To the invisible architects, he said, scanning the room, who never asked for applause but made damn sure the building stood anyway. He turned slightly and met my eyes across the space. Didn't smile, didn't wink, just nodded. That was it. No spotlight, no plaque. And yet it landed heavier than any promotion Nolan ever posted about on LinkedIn, because real change doesn't need to announce itself. It lives in the systems that stop breaking, in the vendors who stop questioning payment cycles, in the silence of inboxes that used to be full of panic. Crestwell was no longer run by performance, it was run by structure. And I had finally stepped out from under someone else's shadow to build that structure in full daylight. The months that followed didn't come with fireworks. No standing ovation, no glossy company-wide bulletin with my face and a bullet point list of accomplishments. Just function. Quiet, unshakable function. The systems held. Compliance queues that used to stall for weeks now closed in hours. Vendors who once danced around deadlines suddenly respected them, because our contracts weren't just tighter, they were human. No fluff, no loopholes, just clean lines, fair terms, and the expectation that if you showed up sloppy, the door would close behind you on the way out. Departments that once looped through Nolan's maze of approvals now knew exactly where to go, and more importantly, when not to bother trying to cut corners. The new analysts I brought on thrived, trained their replacements without ego, brought me things I hadn't even thought to look for. That was the goal. Build something that outgrew me without forgetting me. Audits came and went, spotless, unremarkable in the best possible way. Legal stopped hovering. Finance stopped flinching. People finally stopped asking, "Do we have a process for this?" And started saying, "Check the tracker. Dawes probably built it in already." I got a few thank you notes, a couple small gestures, a box of cookies from the legal team with a sticky note. "We sleep better now, you weird wizard." I laughed, kept it on my shelf, but I didn't chase public credit. When comms asked for a photo to include in the year-end highlight reel, I politely declined. Let them focus on the flashier stuff. Let the execs in tailored suits wave at the camera. I was already where I needed to be, because quietly, every internal dashboard, procurement, vendor compliance, onboarding, audit risk, carried the same quiet footer in faded gray font, structured by M. Dawes, integrated for resilience. Not bold, not clickable, just there, a watermark no one could delete. People stopped mispronouncing my name. They started forwarding things with subject lines like "Need Dawes review before approval," not "Legal," not "Nolan's team," just mine. And Nolan? Last I heard, he was consulting independently. No clients listed, no posts in months. Sometimes I wonder if he ever realized that the bottle wasn't what broke him. It was the assumption behind it, that I wouldn't notice, that I wouldn't care, that I hadn't been documenting everything while he was busy polishing his smirk. But I did. I always did. Because sometimes the smallest disrespect unlocks the clearest truths. And sometimes a cheap bottle is just enough to break a facade. Real authority doesn't need a nameplate. It rewrites the ones that forgot yours.